Now we're ready. So, well, you can keep talking, but now whatever you say is going out into the world. So now she can ask questions. That's right. That's okay. So great to have you all here tonight as we continue our study in the Gospel of Luke. We have had 2 previous weeks in Luke, and we've made it up to chapter 6 now. Gotten through John the Baptist, though John may come up again as we, depending on how far we get today. I think he might come up again. It just depends on how much you guys want to talk. That's really the question as we go through this. Anything before we get going? Any housekeeping matters, announcements, questions that you've thought of over the past 2 weeks that you just needed to bring up now? No? I would have had those in an email, I guess. All right. Well, let's carry on. You might remember when last we left our heroes, Jesus has just healed Peter's mother-in-law, which, as I pointed out, meant that Peter had a wife, which is how usually that works, which is always making the wonderful thing you can needle your Catholic friends with, the first pope being married. But anyway, for those of you who want to be ornery, you can do that. It probably needs redeeming if I do it. Anyway, when the sun was setting, everyone brought to Jesus relatives and acquaintances with all kinds of diseases. Placing his hands on each of them, he healed them. Demons also came out of many people. They screamed, "You're God's son," but he spoke harshly to them and wouldn't allow them to speak because they recognized he was the Christ. When daybreak arrived, Jesus went to a deserted place. The crowds were looking for him. When they found him, they tried to keep him from leaving them, but he said, "I must preach the good news of God's kingdom in other cities too, for this is why I was sent." So he continued preaching in the Judean synagogues. A lot of stuff going on. You don't have it as much in Luke as you have it in Mark and Matthew, but you still have that messianic secret that we've talked about. The idea that, at least early on, Jesus doesn't want people to talk about the fact that he is God's son. He doesn't want the demons to mention it. He tells the disciples to keep things quiet when they know things. And it's always is an interesting, I've seen people interpret it a lot of different ways. My favorite is Jesus is using reverse psychology here. No, he's not. I'm willing to entertain a lot of readings of the text. That's not one that I like. What I think is happening here is this recognition that you aren't going to understand who Jesus is without the cross. That sense of calling Jesus Messiah, calling Jesus God's son, before you understand what that means with the cross, the resurrection, and all that entails. It's going to lead to more confusion, more misunderstanding than it's going to lead to understanding. So I tend to interpret the messianic secret as that. Until you have the whole story, you're not allowed to talk about it. And the demons aren't allowed to talk about it either. Nobody's allowed to talk about it in the synoptics. You don't have this as much, and you don't have this at all in John. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you do see this interesting trend here. So, questions on that? We're good? I know, we've talked about it 2 Gospels now, so it shouldn't come as much as a surprise. So, you good, Bob? You were making kind of faces. I didn't know if I was trying to interpret your...
I was hoping you wouldn't notice, but...
I can tell that Faye is pregnant with questions.
Okay. We're talking about the human Jesus,
We are
fully divine and fully human.
correct. Yes.
So Jesus is God and God's son at the same time. So it's not like, don't call me God's son because I'm God.
No, it's not like, no.
You don't understand.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the notion of I mean, this is one of those times when using the term son is going to be misleading, right? It's a way in which that would imply connection to a first century reader that for us implies a separation that is the reason that the Mormons read it the way they do, right? I mean, Mormons read it, Jesus is the Son of God, because he's actually God's son, right? God had a son, and then they named him Jesus, and so he's actually the physical Son of God. And then you have, Protestants or, from other churches that join the Mormon church, like, it finally makes sense to me now. This is the way it makes sense. Whereas we tend to embrace the mystery of the incarnate Christ, that is in fact God incarnate. And the language of son was used to convey that in the first century, but it wouldn't have implied the kind of sonship that we think of when we think of sonship, right? It implies a division that we wouldn't necessarily put onto it. I wasn't expecting Christology questions, but yeah, that's a great point. He's not saying, don't call me God's son, that's going to lead to a misunderstanding. That's not what he means. Don't call me God's son, because they don't know what it means, Messiah means at this point. That's what I think is at work. So, I can't read everybody's face, but I knew he had a question. Are there any others? Go ahead, Ben.
Just the observation that it could also be sabotage, because that's one of the main stumbling blocks for the Jews accepting.
Oh, accepted that's divinity.
As soon as they hear son, God doesn't
Right, right.
He's one.
Yeah, well, the notion of Son of Man is one he will embrace, which had divine ideas to it, but not, yeah, this notion of God's Son is
So they might be pretty clever there.
maybe, maybe.
And he's calling
Clever demons, yes, maybe so.
That might be why he's speaking harshly.
Yeah, but I think it's we wouldn't allow them to speak because they knew he was the Christ. They knew he was the Messiah. I think they're pushing back against that notion of Messiah there. Yeah. One other thing that I think is interesting, this is sort of a bigger picture question. It's one that I've noticed with this part of the story. It happens a little more explicitly in Mark, but it's interesting to me because remember, this was the Sabbath, and then the sun went down, and so it's no longer the Sabbath, right? So now it's Sunday night, because Sunday night is Saturday night for us, right? You remember how that works? Night comes first, then the day, right? So he's gone to the synagogue is over, so now it's now Sunday. And I find it interesting that after this, they can't find him on Sunday. That a little bit of, it's a little more explicit in Mark, but a little bit of foreshadowing of the crowds looking for him and wanting him to stay there on Sunday because they didn't know where he was, and then they find him, and then they want him to stay longer. Just a little bit, I think, of foreshadowing that you get in the story. Kind of a neat idea. All right, let's keep moving. Another Sabbath, Jesus entered a synagogue to teach. A man was there whose right hand was withered. The legal experts and Pharisees were watching him closely to see if he'd heal on the Sabbath. They were looking for a reason to bring charges against him. So we already see this growing, we saw this in Matthew too, this growing animosity with religious leadership against Jesus. They were looking for a reason to bring charges against him. Jesus knew their thoughts, so he said to the man with the withered hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." He got up and stood there. Jesus said to the legal experts and Pharisees, "Here's a question for you. Is it legal on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" Looking around at them, he said, "Stretch out your hand." So he did. His hand was made healthy. They were furious and began talking with each other about what to do to Jesus. In Matthew, the relationship between Jesus and religious leaders is a little more explicitly hostile all the way through. In Luke, there's a little more, there are good Pharisees in Luke. There are Pharisees Jesus will eat with. There are Pharisees that contribute to his ministry. There are Pharisees that warn him when he's in danger. And so there seemed to be, it seems to be a much more complex relationship between Jesus and the Pharisees in Luke. But obviously, we still have that animosity with the religious leadership. We still have those individuals that are threatened by this. And it's interesting to me because it's obviously to do good is fine. This sense of, I mean, there was even the allowance that, if your ox falls over in a ditch on the Sabbath, you're allowed to get your ox out of a ditch. You're allowed to actually, do this if you need to on the Sabbath. It's not work. It's all right. And so it really is just trying to find a reason is what it is. We don't like Jesus. And so we need a reason to be mad at him. And so this is going to do. And Jesus accuses them of this a little bit later in our reading today, if we get to it, about them you're just looking for a reason to be mad. I mean, that's really all it is. So, yeah. So good? Okay. So we see this building, these examples of healing, miracles. During that time, Jesus went out to the mountain to pray. Very common, a lot more prayer in Luke. Jesus doing a lot more praying in this. And the Spirit, I told you last time, the Spirit's moving more in Luke. Obviously, when he's talking about Acts, that's where the Spirit's really moving. But the Spirit does some moving in Luke and a lot more praying in Luke. He prayed to God all night long. At daybreak, he called together his disciples. He chose 12 of them, whom he called apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became the traitor. Judas is always last in the list, by the way. All the Gospels, when they list the disciples, always put Judas last.
And they really want to make sure he's
the one. He's the one, yeah. So,
call him out early.
not this one. This, by the way, is only in Luke. The other two Gospels don't call him Judas for the 12 disciples. Anyone know which one's missing here that you can remember? You've been singing the song when you were a kid? There were 12 disciples, Jesus called to help. You know that one? Simon, Peter, Andrew, James' brother John. Okay, I'm alone on that one. All right, well, I'm not singing.
So who is it?
Nobody knows?
Well.
Thaddeus.
Oh.
Yeah, Thaddeus. So this is Thaddeus in Mark and Matthew. Judas, the son of James. Couple interesting things. Luke is the only one to bring us this word. Apostles. Yeah. Apparently we had a whole bunch of disciples in Luke. He got together a crowd of them. And then he called together 12 that he called apostles.
Okay.
Okay, should I sit down? Because you started, that's a question that's coming, I can tell.
And I've asked you before.
Go ahead.
And I'm still confused. Disciples versus apostles.
Right. Go. Is that what it is? Okay. Okay, disciples are obviously, think of them as students, ones who are going to emulate the teacher in this. That's a disciple. It actually gives us our root word discipline. The teacher's given us our rules. We're going to do what the teacher has asked us to do. Apostles are one who are a messenger, one who's sent. So it carries with it this idea of going. Luke in particular, big deal about it being 12 apostles. For obvious reasons, there's a big deal about it being 12, right? Because 12 tribes represent Israel, 12 apostles represent Israel. So this is the church is going, we've got this new 12 that's represented. This is why it bothered the disciples so much that they were the 11 disciples at the beginning of Acts, the 11 apostles at the beginning of Acts, because no one ever heard of the 11 apostles, right? So we're going to need somebody. And so they went through everything. They had some requirements. You had to be with us from the beginning. You know, you had to know Jesus and hear his teachings. And they came down to 2 that they trusted, and they decided to cast lots because they didn't want to leave it to chance. Because that was how God spoke. God spoke through lots in their mind, right? There was no supernatural. There was only God who works in the world.
Rob, you were being funny when you said that, but you didn't say that to be funny.
I was being funny when I said that, but I was not to be funny.
They didn't think it was being left for chance.
It was not being left to chance. Casting lots was not leaving it to chance. Casting lots was getting God's opinion. That's God's design on this, right? The human and the Thuman, right? We're gonna see who this is, and it falls on Matthias, who we never hear about in the story ever again. And I have always maintained to all of my Acts scholar colleagues, one of them whom I love dearly, Mike McKeever, why are you making decisions before the Spirit shows up? Because it seems to me that's just a bad plan. I mean, making decisions about the fate of the church before, pray in there, wait for the Spirit to come, like Jesus said. But while they're waiting, they're like, no one's ever heard of the 11 apostles. We're going to need a 12th, right? I think God's plan for the 12th apostle to take Judas's place was Paul. Paul certainly thought that too, right? Paul really was selling Paul as, I'm the one who's. Nobody else agreed with that in the sense of the challenge to Paul's apostleship was always Paul is always fighting for his apostolic life. In every letter he writes, in Corinthians more than any, he is fighting to be respected at the level of Peter and the rest. But I think Paul thought of himself as, and when I read the story, I think Luke thought of Paul as that 12th apostle. So apostles are different for most of the time. Most of the time, apostles are different. However, other people are called apostles as well, right? Paul lists Junia, a woman, as an apostle in Romans 16. Other apostles and teachers are mentioned. And so that word gets dropped a lot more than just the 12 here. But for Luke is all about order, right? And remember, he's going to tell us an orderly story. And so we've got the 12 apostles, and we've got the 12 tribes of Israel, and the church. We got this new bunch. We're showing something new that's happening. The apostles are different than just the disciples. The disciples are anybody who's following Jesus. These 12 are special and different.
So he called together his disciples, and from those he chose 12.
Right.
So there could have been an infinite number of
Probably less than infinity,
disciples.
but yes.
But my point is that in my little mind, I often feel like I hear those words used interchangeably.
Oh, yes, they are used interchangeably.
I've never understood.
They are people, let me say this, people will use those words interchangeably. Some authors don't, right? Luke doesn't. Paul does.
So 12 of the disciples became
12 of the disciples are apostles.
apostles as well.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And of course the wife,
The way they showed it on Chosen.
that's not the way they showed it on The Chosen? Oh, I can't, I was not called as a creative consultant on The Chosen. So, sorry.
But Rob, how many disciples do you think? There's any kind of estimate?
No way to know.
Idea?
No way to know. Yeah.
More than 12.
At least, yes, I'm going to say more than 14 because they had 2 others who were there in Acts that they could choose from. So there's got to be at least 14, right?
What were you
Yes.
going to say about the wives?
The wives of the apostles or the epistles? No, that's not true. That was a joke. That was just a joke. Epistle's a letter. That's an old preacher joke. I just thought, but it's a good one. It's not a bad joke. Yeah, the apostles and the epistles. No. Not how that works. All right. What else do I want to say about the apostles? I don't know. I think that's what I want to say.
And Paul, and you said about Paul.
Yes.
Paul felt, he was an apostle.
Yes, Paul felt Paul was an apostle. Yes.
Paul an apostle?
Well, I'm going to say Paul's an apostle. Yes. Nobody at Corinth thought Paul was an apostle. So Paul is fighting for apostleship. He really is. And that's why he always, when he was listing, Jesus appeared to Peter and then to the 12 and then to these and finally to me, right? That sense of that he's the last of the people that God appeared to by Jesus. He was really trying to establish his authority for these churches. Right, to have Jesus, the resurrected Jesus appeal. Yes, exactly. You had to know the risen Christ to be an apostle. Paul's like, well, I did. Late, but I did. So, yeah, it was important for Paul that he was an apostle. And I say that, but then he uses that word a little more freely. To great leaders in the churches are apostles for him. So we got to be careful because different authors are using the word different ways. And then, of course, we have our associations with them. And yeah, but I did not think we were going to spend 5 minutes on that this evening. I'll be honest. I didn't anticipate that. Good question, though. It's worth having. It's a conversation worth having. Okay. This is what I thought we were going to spend all our time on. Sermon on the Plain. Yeah, good. Yes. Jesus came down from the mountain with them and stood on a large area of level ground. Great company of his disciples and a huge crowd. Great company. That's more than 14, Howie. That's what I'm going to go with. That's more than 14. A huge crowd of people from all around Judea, Jerusalem, the area around Tyre and Sidon joined him from there. So we've got not only Jews but Gentiles that are coming into this group here. So a big deal for Luke. We told you about this gospel being targeted more toward non-Jewish reading than certainly than Matthew. This is another one of those indicators. They came to hear him and to be healed from their diseases, and those bothered by unclean spirits were healed. Again, healing and demonic possession in the mind of the first century, it's the same issue, right? We're not thinking about germs here at all. We're thinking about unseen things that can make you sick. So, not germs. Anyway, sometimes we're closer than we think, I think, just anyway. The whole crowd wanted to touch him because power was going out from him and he was healing everyone. Another important thing in Luke, there's a lot of touching in Luke. Jesus is touching the mat of the dead boy, we'll see in a little bit. He's touching the lepers. The woman with the bleeding condition touches him. The crowd wants to touch him. Lots of touching. And I think it's significant because in the Old Testament, if an unclean thing touches a clean thing, the clean thing is unclean, right? The unclean thing soils the clean thing. Here, Jesus cleanses the unclean thing, the unclean spirits here, or the dead body, or the leper, someone rendered unclean with a skin condition. So we see this beautiful reversal of, in the Old Testament, clean and unclean being a separation, because you got to keep the clean stuff clean. Here we see God coming out of the tabernacle, coming out of the temple, and actually having contact and cleansing the unclean things as we go through. So I don't like to just skip past. There's a lot, if you look at it, a lot of touching, more touching in Luke than the other Gospels, which I just think is interesting to call attention to.
Could it also just be underscoring his humanity as well?
Maybe.
He lived among us.
Yeah, he was physical. Yeah.
Flesh and blood, and not just
Yeah.
a spirit or an idea or an angel.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, one of the early heresies the church was dealing with was Docetism, and this idea that Jesus just seemed human. The word dokei in Greek means to seem or to look. And so the Docetism was that, well, Jesus, he looked human, but he was really just divine, which frankly, in some ways, a lot of people have that idea even now. That Docetism comes in the back door of the church. This notion of a Jesus with bad breath and pimples is hard to process, right? Body odor Jesus. It's not one that we want to think about. But a fully human Jesus was an important point actually throughout the history of the church to make that point. Talked to Tom Norwood about this today, that it could be trying to drive home that he's not a spirit. There was a physical, didn't just seem human. There's physical here. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't considered that. Other thoughts? All right, Jesus got a crowd. Time to break into a sermon. He is going to go viral here. He's going to take an opportunity. This is an opportunity. We're not on the Mount. This is not the Sermon on the Mount. This is the Sermon on the Plain. Quite literally more down to earth than the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount, very spiritual, very holy, right? Very up here. Sermon, blessed are the poor in spirit, right? Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. No, not here. Jesus raised his eyes to his disciples and said, happy are you who are poor, because the kingdom, God's kingdom is yours. Happy are you who hunger now, because you'll be satisfied. Happy are you who weep now, because you will laugh. So we're not talking poor in spirit. We're not talking hunger and thirst for righteousness. We're talking the poor. We are talking the hungry that are finding their help and hope in this new kingdom that Christ is bringing. Very, I say down to earth, but down to earth. Very real concerns here that aren't in any way spiritualized. Well, I can say more about that. Happy, blessed, it's the same word, makaroi in Greek. Hard to know how to translate that in English. I don't know elegantly how to translate that in English. It's not exactly happy, but blessed doesn't quite capture. I mean, it's somewhere in this favored by God kind of idea that you have here.
Favored?
Yeah, favored's not right either. It's sort of favored. You have God's attention. You've got God's focus. You are God's priority. Something like that. Put all that in the mix and give me an elegant English word. I don't know. Sometimes translation's hard to make elegant. I have to correct it again by Mike on that. You never should say you can't translate it. You can translate it. It's just not elegant when you translate it. Because how many times you can't translate this in English because it means, and then they tell you what it means. It's like you just translated it. Didn't do it elegantly, perhaps, but so I can't do it elegant. Anyway, we're going to keep looking at these. These are obviously very different than the Matthew Beatitudes. Happy are you when people hate you, reject you, insult you, condemn your name as evil because of the human one, the Son of Man. The CEB calls it human one here. That capitalizes it. Rejoice when that happens. Leap for joy because you have great reward in heaven. Their ancestors did the same thing to the prophets. So yeah, the Common English Bible, when it translates Son of Man, it uses it as the human one and it capitalizes it to show you it's a title.
But that is Jesus talking in the third person?
About Jesus, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that is evoking a clear messianic claim. Son of Man was a title that was expected. There was, it's really hard to know exactly what Jesus is trying to invoke, and because he's probably trying to invoke all of it. Because the word Son of Man, B'nai Adam in Hebrew, just means human. It just means a person. That's why Ezekiel loves, God loves that title for Ezekiel. He just said, hey, human, as opposed to, hey, idol, right? We're the only legitimate idols in the world. We're the only things allowed to be in the image of God. No other images of God are permitted, just people. And one of Ezekiel's main problems is idolatry. And so God treats Ezekiel in the book of Ezekiel the way people treated idols. God picks him up, moves him around, talks through his mouth. He doesn't even have his own words in Ezekiel, they're God's words. At one point, finally, God loosens his tongue and he's able to talk his own words. But for most of it, God's treating him like an idol in the story. And so there, on the one hand, in that book, it just means dude. It just means a person. That's all it means. In Daniel has a Son of Man coming in the clouds, riding on and signaling sort of the end of the world, this apocalyptic vision of the Son of Man coming down with this sort of somehow semi-divine or even divine-ish. I wouldn't say divine because obviously, as Ben points out, thorough monotheist, but there's a sense of angelic beingness to this Son of Man coming down. So what is Jesus trying to invoke? Well, probably all that in this kingdom that is coming.
Don't tell anybody.
But don't tell anybody. Not yet. Don't tell anybody yet. We go and tell at the end of this, but not now. Yeah. Couple interesting things. These blessings and the warnings after them are framed in terms of economic issues, poor and rich, right? Not poor in spirit, but poor and rich. Luke has very specific concerns regarding wealth and poverty. Most of the gospel, this is going to be fun, most of the gospel seems like an inversion. Most of the gospel seems like down is up and up is down. The poor are going to be made rich. The rich are going to be made poor. The powerful are going to be made lowly. The lowly are going to be brought high. And we're just flipping it. First will be last will be first. Exactly. And what ends up happening is it's as though he is building this scaffolding on this inversion and then comes along at the end of the gospel and subverts the vision on some levels and shows you what a righteous rich person looks like. It's a really interesting thing that Luke does. I mean, he brings economic matters are hugely important to Luke. All the way through till we see in Acts chapter 2, the new church has this bold economic vision of sharing everything in common, and nobody has need because they're all sharing this. And in Luke 14, right, everyone, if you don't sell everything you have, you cannot be my disciple. Luke, it's not he's talking to one guy. He's talking to you, if you don't, to everyone in Luke 14. We'll see that. And Luke builds all this up, but then kind of pulls something away that says, you know what, I'm doing something different. And so we'll talk about that as we get to it. I do think that it's hard to extricate the rich in this passage and most of Luke's passage with the systemic evils of Roman occupation. In other words, if you are doing well because you're connected to the people who are in charge and you're working the system pretty well. So it's not just a matter of money at this point. It is also a matter of the systemic participation in this at the same time. And so that we're going to talk about wealth and poverty all the way through Luke from here on. We've already seen it, right? We saw it in Zechariah. We saw it Zechariah's song about the powerful being brought low. We saw it in the Magnificat. We saw that there too. But we're going to see more of it from here on, certainly. I do think it's interesting the Beatitudes are usually formulated in the third person. Here, they're all second. You know, that notion of happy are you. It's not happy is the one, which is normally a beatitude, right? Blessed are they. Blessed are the ones who hunger. Not here. Here it's, when you who are hungry, you who are poor. Interesting. And I do think anticipating persecution as it's already going to happen. There's nothing, and when people hate you, and they will, just consider yourself lucky because they always hate the good folks. Yeah. Prophets, teachers. Yeah, absolutely. So, some interesting points here. We're going to keep moving. There's some woes. This is an addition to Luke that Matthew doesn't give us, is the woes. We get the blessings in Matthew, but we don't get the woes. We get woes in Luke. So, we good? I'm just going to go to the woes. Okay. How terrible for you who are rich. Poor rich folks. They just don't, you feel sorry for them, don't you? Just really, that's rough. You've already received your comfort. How terrible for you to have plenty now because you'll be hungry. How terrible for you who laugh now because you'll mourn and weep. How terrible for you when all speak well of you. Their ancestors did the same things to the false prophets. This would have been a complete inversion in the minds of the people. They would not have this would have completely blown their minds. Because remember what I said, there's no sense of supernatural, natural division here, right? God is responsible. So if you have wealth, clearly you're favored by God, right? Obviously, the formula is easy, right? If you're obedient, God blesses you. If you're disobedient, God punishes you. Everybody knows this. So if you got wealth, how about that? God blesses you. And Jesus comes along and says, boy, the rich folks, don't you feel bad for them? That's rough. That's rough. It's the same thing you saw in Hosea, which, when everybody in the 8th century, it was called the golden age for the Second Kingdom, the divided monarchy. The golden age of the divided monarchy was called that because there was tremendous wealth in the hands of a few. And Hosea comes along, and most of the people thought, oh, look how God has blessed us. Look at our great wealth. And Hosea's like, no, your thumb's on the scale. That is why you have all this money. You are cheating people out of all of this money, and God is not happy about this. Destruction is going to come. And so this is what Jesus is working against, these rich folks that are working the system because they're not participating in this the way God would have them to participate. And so just a warning here. And I would love to have seen the faces of that crowd when they heard these two things because it would have blown their minds that this was the case. But we'll talk more about rich and poor stuff as we get into this. But I say to you who are willing to hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Someone slaps you on the cheek, offer the other one as well. If someone takes your coat, don't withhold your shirt either. Give to everyone who asks. Don't demand your things back from those who take them. Treat people in the same way you want them to treat you. So we get these. This is almost exactly the same as Matthew gave it to us, right?
Their minds weren't blown enough.
Right, exactly.
Previous.
Right.
Now they got to deal with this too.
Right, exactly. Do good to those who hate you. Yeah, and again, I do love this if someone slaps your cheek, offer the other as well. This notion of shaming, because that's what a slap would be. It would be public shaming. And to turn the other cheek is to, first of all, invite them to use a hand that they don't use for this sort of thing, because you do use your left hand for unclean things. You use your right hand for clean things. In fact, in Qumran, the Dead Sea Scroll community, then there's rules for the Essenes that if you gesture with your left hand, you're put out of the community for 3 days. So no gesturing with your left hand. It actually says gesticulating with your left hand, but I don't know what that looks like exactly, more than gesturing. But don't do that. You'll be put out of town. But you're inviting this person to use the other one. You are taking, the person who was being shamed is now taking control of the situation. So you now are, the person who is being shamed is now reclaiming agency in this relationship. Sorry, that didn't shame me like you wanted. Try again, right? This taking your coat is probably a legal response. It's not someone stealing your coat. It's if you owe money, they take you to court, they sued you for everything. You're allowed to sue for property, and some people would go so far as to sue for everything. Because, well, give them everything, walk home naked. And let everybody know why you're naked. Because this person has, again, reclaiming it, make them clown them. That's really what he's talking about, clown them. Make them look a fool. This reclaiming agency for the person without any agency is important. Yeah, go ahead.
The last thing he says is, in summation, treat people
as God, yes.
the way that you want them to treat. Do you want people to make you into a clown?
Do you want people to call out when you are behaving badly?
Okay.
Right? Yeah. That's the question. If you are abusing your power, if you're abusing your position.
Okay, so it's not, okay.
Yeah.
It's exposing them.
Yes, it's exposing what they're doing.
And so you can wish that if you're mistreating people, you want to be called out. So, okay.
I mean, you would want God to hold you accountable. God holds people accountable, right?
Thank you.
On some levels, yeah. So it's not a surrendering of agency. It's a reclaiming of agency to one who has power over you. That's the go an extra mile thing, too, right? They are entitled to do this, but you're the one now in control of how far you're going to go. And they're going to they could get in trouble if someone finds out that you walked 2 miles. This Roman soldier who's forced you, because that's not allowed. So now they're worried for the next mile and concerned. So again, this is not that's the Matthew passage I'm quoting, but yeah, it's a clowning for Christ. If you love those who love you, why should you be commended? Even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, why should you be commended? Even sinners do that. If you lend to those people from whom you expect repayment, why should you be commended? Even sinners lend to sinners, expect to be paid in full. Instead, love your enemies. Do good. Lend expecting nothing in return. If you do, you have great reward. You'll be acting the way the children of the Most High act, for he is kind to ungrateful and wicked people. Be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. All of this is about being like God. All of this is about being like God. Don't judge and you won't be judged. Don't condemn, you won't be condemned. Forgive and you'll be forgiven. Give and it'll be given to you. A good portion, packed down, firmly shaken, overflowing, will fall into your lap. Packed down, you're not... Think of brown sugar, right? Or even making a cake with flour. If you pack it down, there's more flour in there, probably than you need. You shouldn't measure flour like that. But it's a lot of flour if it's packed down. So that's the packed down, firmly shaken, overflowing. The portion you give will determine the portion you receive in return. So, yeah. This is what it's like to look like God. That's the whole point of the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain. The love of enemies is not abstract, but active. You are pursuing the good for your enemy. Non-judgmental kindness and acts of grace. It will benefit you. You'll have a measure packed down and overflowing, but it is an imitation of God. It's what God looks like. It's how God loves you. God offered God's life on the cross for you without waiting for you to offer something back. Right? God did that freely. Matthew expresses this as the rain falls on the just and the unjust. That sense of God gives grace to whoever. God loves everyone. There's no one that is not loved by God. So again, look like God. What I say is my only sermon, right? Be like Jesus. That's what we're looking at. This is what Jesus looks like. So he continues on to with these other parts of the sermon, but I've been wound up there. So anything we need to unpack about being like Jesus? I know we don't like it. Not a fan. But I can't get around it. That's my problem. So, because that's what Jesus did, right? Jesus said to do it, and then Jesus did it. So if someone can give me a way around that Jesus told me to do it, and then did it himself, that's pretty airtight for me theologically on some level. So, because yes, Jesus was God incarnate, but Jesus also was showing us what we were capable of if we lived a life close to God. So, dang it. So, love my enemies. Jesus also told them a riddle. I think this is a really riddle, because I know the answer to this one, but a blind person can't lead another blind person, right? Won't they both fall into a ditch? Anyone got that riddle? The answer is yes, they cannot. I agree, Jesus. Yeah, I missed the riddle. Anyway, that's actually a pretty good translation of that Greek word. I don't quite know the riddle there. I'm missing something. Anyway, disciples aren't greater than their teacher, but whoever is fully prepared to be will be like their teacher. Why do you see a splinter in your brother or sister's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye? How can you say to your brother or sister, brother, sister, let me take the splinter out of your eye when you don't see the log in your own eye? You deceive yourselves. First take the log out of your eye, then you will see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother or sister's eye. I don't think I need to unpack that too much, huh? No, don't be hypocrites. Also not easy. A good tree doesn't produce bad fruit, nor does a bad tree produce good fruit. Each tree is known by its fruit. People don't gather figs from thorny plants, nor do they pick grapes from prickly bushes. A good person produces good and good treasury of their inner self, while an evil person produces evil from the evil treasury of the inner self. The inner self overflows with words that are spoken. Yeah. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. You will know people by their work. Same stuff that Matthew was saying, just expressing it a little differently. So, yeah. No happier about this, are we? Okay, we'll move on. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say? Well, that's a great question. I'll show you what it's like when someone comes to me, hears my words, puts them into practice. It's like a person building a house by digging deep and laying a foundation on bedrock. A very unusual way to construct a house in the first century in Palestine. Palestine often did not dig deep and build a foundation on bedrock. That is not the way things were normally done. They normally just sat on a row of stones at most. You'd put mud bricks on and then thatch a roof. That's it. So it's interesting that Jesus, you know what it's like? Not the way you people build houses. It's like having your foundation on bedrock. When the flood came, the rising water smashed against that house, but the water couldn't shake the house because it was well built. But those who don't put it into practice, what they hear are like a person who built a house without a foundation. The floodwater smashed against it, and it collapsed instantly and was completely destroyed. A couple things interesting. Jesus puts this story in the context of discipleship. In Matthew, this story is in the context of wise and foolish. There's the wise builder and the wise man built his house upon the... I hear you all singing now. That one you know. You don't know the disciple song, but you know the wise man song. Anyway. It's interesting that in Luke, it's not wise and foolish. It's if you hear me or you don't hear me. Which I wonder, again, if this is an audience issue, where wise man and foolish man carried in a Jewish audience an understanding that they could have no problem. Oh, I get what he's doing here. But here in Luke's Gentile audience, which is often thinking of wisdom in very different ways, probably he wants to brass tacks. If you're like Jesus, it's like you're building it on a foundation. If you're not like Jesus, then you're not. If you do what Jesus says, then you're like. I find it interesting that he simplified that message, probably to keep it from being misunderstood. That's my guess. That wisdom, because wisdom had a real interesting association in places like Corinth and other parts of the Gentile world. That's my guess. I'm not a Luke scholar, but that's my guess.
So if they didn't build their houses like that, was it a common occurrence that there might be a flood and houses collapsed? Or is there not very many floods?
There are, well, Palestine only gets rain about 6 months out of the year. It rains from October to April. And as a result, you have many dry creek beds. As someone from Texas, you have no problems understanding this at all, right? When the rains come, I mean, some parts of Palestine get as much rain as you know, a nice temperate Virginia, back when we would get lots of rain. But they get it in 6 months. So you can imagine the storms that you get. I mean, there's a reason that Baal was the storm god, right? Because they got some wicked storms. So you could get flooding, yeah. And I mean, I would like to believe they were smart enough to not build their houses in a wadi, but I don't know. I mean, maybe so. We're not. That's true. You're right. You're exactly right. I mean, I like to point out that the Mississippi River at the city of New Orleans is 6 feet above sea level. The city of New Orleans is 4 feet above sea level, right? And the levees are what keep that together. So you're right. I mean, we're. What do I always say? People have always been. Yes. That's what I always say when people say, yeah, aren't things just getting worse and worse? Like, no, we've always been exactly this stupid. We've been this stupid forever. We have. So you know what, Meg? Maybe. You know, I'd like to believe that they were smart enough not to build their houses with no foundation next to places where the water runs, but bet you they did. Yeah, bet you they did. Won't happen to us, but the price is so good. So that's why, no. Anyway, where are we time-wise? All right, we'll go a little bit for the centurion. This is in Luke 7. After Jesus finished presenting all his words among the people, he entered Capernaum. That's the place with the nice synagogue I showed you a couple weeks ago. Capharnaum. A centurion had a servant who was very important to him, but the servant was ill and about to die. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to Jesus to ask him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they earnestly pleaded with Jesus, "He deserves to have you do this for him." They said, "He loves our people, and he built our synagogue for us." So it's interesting because the man doesn't come to Jesus himself on this. There's some intermediaries here. There's not intermediaries in the Matthew version of this story. Here there is. It's interesting. Jesus went with him. He had almost reached the house when the centurion sent his friends to say to Jesus, "Lord, don't be bothered." So again, another set of messengers here. That this insulation. "I don't deserve to have you come under my roof." Now, a couple of things here. First of all, the Jewish friends said, "Oh, he totally deserves this." He says, I don't deserve this." Later on in Acts, Peter has his vision. He's called to go to Cornelius' house. Of course, a Jew you don't go into a Gentile's house. Be rendered unclean if you go into a Gentile's house. Here we have Jesus on his way to, it would seem ostensibly, a Gentile's house. And the Gentile says, well, no. So he, apparently, the Gentile, it seems, has an understanding of Jewish tradition and custom to the point that he doesn't want Jesus to violate that, which I think is interesting in this. Particularly with Luke Acts. I mean, if that was in a different gospel, I might not read as much into it. But the fact that we have that in Acts and we have this in Luke tells me he was probably thinking about that when he told this story. In fact, I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. I'm also a man appointed under authority with soldiers under me. I say to one, go, and he goes. To another, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and the servant does it. So even I'm not worthy. When Jesus heard these words, he was impressed with the centurion. He turned to the crowd following him and said, "I tell you, even in Israel, I haven't found faith like this." When the centurion's friends returned to his house, they found the servant restored to health. So long-distance healing. This is the only example in the Gospels, I mean, the other times the story is told, of long-distance healing. Healing at a distance. So, quantum healing that we have going on here. Quantum entanglement.
About the touching
aspect of this. That's right. And here's one where he's not even present, much less touching. Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, so he doesn't have to touch. He can do it. Spooky action at a distance, as Albert Einstein called it. But healing the centurion, this probably, I'm assuming, probably a garrison attached to Herod in this area at the time. That's my assumption. I mean, Herod would have controlled this area, so I'm assuming maybe some Roman attachment there, maybe. Don't know. That Rome did not have direct control of Capernaum. That's why I'm curious. That's looking at details that Luke didn't care about, but I'm curious when I think about it. Let's do one more miracle. A little later, Jesus went to a city called Nain. His disciples and a great crowd traveled with him. As he approached the city gate, a dead man was being carried out. He was his mother's only son, and she was a widow. A large crowd from the city was with her. When he saw her, the Lord had compassion for her and said, "Don't cry." He stepped forward, touched the stretcher, how about that, on which the dead man was being carried. Those carrying him stood still. Jesus said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. So there we have the close action healing here. But it is interesting to me that we have two healing stories back to back, one of a Gentile and one healing a widow's son. Does this bring to mind anything else that we have talked about in the Gospel of Luke before now, or that perhaps you remember elsewhere from the Bible?
Jesus came for everyone, not just the
He
Jews.
did, absolutely.
That's not what you were.
No, it was something actual, very specific. Do you remember when the crowd at Nazareth got angry at Jesus? When did they get angry at him? They didn't get angry when he said, "I come to set the captives free and give sight to the blind and release the captives." No, not Palm Sunday. Meg?
He kept going.
He kept going.
I don't remember what the kept going part was.
You can't remember how he kept going? He kept going and said, "Hey, there were a lot of people in Israel that might have had skin diseases, but Elijah was called to Naaman up in Syria." Or on Children's Sunday, Norman, one of the children were supposed to read that scripture from the pulpit on a Children's Sunday, and he called Naaman Norman through the whole reading. And I can't miss that now. So Norman, who is, of course, the Gentile from Syria. And then he kept going with the next story, which was, weren't there a lot of widows in Israel? But Elijah went to this Zarephath widow. Yeah. So here we have a story. This is just 3 chapters after Jesus has made everybody mad in Nazareth about this, right? Jesus helps out a Gentile military leader, same as Elijah did, and then a widow here. So again, I don't think that's an accident that we put these two stories right next to each other 3 chapters after we had this conversation. So invoking this very much that Jesus is another prophet. I mean, he's like Elijah, which is funny because we've already been told that John the Baptist is like Elijah, and we certainly had that in Matthew, and also a little bit in Luke. But Jesus has a little Elijah in him here, is what Luke is saying. He's doing some Elijah stuff in this story as well. I think that's significant. And also, this woman, this is a person that's got nothing in this culture. It's a thoroughly patriarchal culture. Women are only understood as in the way in which they can relate to a man, either as wife or as mother. She is no longer a wife. She is no longer a mother. No one would have thought a thing if Jesus walks past this woman at all. And he values her. He sees her. He values her. He raises this child. It not only restores her son to her, it restores her socially. It's the same thing we talked about with Peter's mother-in-law, excuse me. That, remember, she was ill, and then as soon as she gets better, she starts serving them, which is pretty mean to do to a person who's been sick. But what the story is saying is she has been restored socially. She's been brought back into community with her people, right? She's been brought back into community. She's no longer, relying on whatever means of support, her extended family, whatever, to try and eat. Her son is back. So it's beautiful restoration, I think, in this, which is just really nice. No one would have thought anything if the servant died. But Jesus heals the centurion's servant as well, valuing those that others don't value, which I think is significant. Yeah. Well, the next thing I want to talk about, we don't have time to do justice this evening, but any questions or comments or struggles that we have before we go a little bit earlier than normal tonight, but not much. No question that Nancy wants on film?
Well, I do have one.
Go for it. apostles.
Yes.
Boy, you are hung up on this disciple apostle thing, aren't you? Yeah, I don't know.
No, but seriously,
No, I really don't. I really don't know.
name the 12 disciples.
Right.
That's,
Mattathias, Joseph of, yeah.
I do see that a lot.
Yeah.
But that's not,
Matthias, I should say.
that's not it.
No. No, I mean, they were disciples. They were also apostles. And if we say the 12, we know who we're talking about, right? The 12 disciples, we know who everybody, we know what we mean.
But I still think there's a distinction, and people use those words interchangeably.
They do. But like I said, Paul does.
And they're not the same.
They're not. Paul uses them interchangeably.
I have to be a disciple.
Luke does. You are a disciple, I'd like to believe. So, I've come to know you pretty well, Nancy. I think you're a disciple.
Consider her a disciple.
Absolutely.
Well, definitely a student.
Yeah,
But there is a distinction.
there is. I mean, apostle means, one who is sent, messenger, something like that. Which, I think
Oh, so they were like the appointed
the official spokespeople for Jesus. Yes, right. But
Books
The marketing group.
that talk about the 12 disciples.
Yes.
They draw pictures of them. and
They do.
put names and they talk about
They do.
But that's,
They write songs. There were 12 disciples. Jesus called to help him. Yeah, sure. Classic that no one knows but me in this room. Yes. Yes.
But it's also like when
There's a lot of things that no one knows in this room but you.
Cute.
as the 10 laws, there are 600 some odd laws.
613 laws. Yeah.
So it's not, that's not the sum total of all laws, but
No.
that they have some kind of significance or importance, and numbers are important to us, just as human people, so, this is kind
And they're not even called commandments in the Bible. They're called things.
of 10 words.
God spoke all these things or words, same word in Hebrew, thing or word. Spoke all these things or words to Israel. Yeah, which I think is fun. But yeah, and remember, numbers, like I said it over the thing. Numbers mean a lot to us at the men's retreat. I mentioned this.
I
But
think
numbers are different for
the
them.
reason why this stuck out to me as important is because I have always seen them, even though I realized there was overlapping names, as really two distinctive categories.
Okay.
When in fact, that's not the case at all. It could be,
Luke is using them as distinctive categories.
but when it comes to the actual chosen ones, they were also disciples.
They were.
So they're not distinct there.
Well, yes. I mean, I think the disciples of Jesus, all the great hosts, the company of disciples were chosen and special, and yeah, but he set aside these 12 as a symbol of the church, as a symbol of the people, I should say. I mean, there's 24 pillars in the book of Revelation, and most people assume that's the 12 Old Testament patriarchs and the 12 disciples, except of course there were 14 Old Testament patriarchs and there were at least 13 disciples that we can talk about here. So, I mean, numbers, right? It's
Oh, I know. It's just that I do think that there have been two categories.
correct.
And you don't necessarily see where they become one.
For Paul, in Paul's letters, in the epistles, in Paul's letters, the words are almost interchangeable, right? He talks about Junia the apostle, right? And these other, and a woman can be an apostle. But for Luke's doing something different. Luke's trying to be precise. Luke's trying to play with this word. He does the same thing with geography, right? All the other gospels, Jesus has resurrection appearances. I'm going to say Matthew and John has resurrection appearances in the Galilee. But for Luke, that would screw up the story. So the resurrection appearances are only in Jerusalem and just outside. We go to Emmaus, right? As far as we're going. Because in Acts, he's telling the story about Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, uttermost parts of the world. And if you're in Galilee, that screws up the map. So we're going to do the concentric circles, and I'm not telling those stories, I'm just telling these stories. So he's making some choices, as all of our Bible writers make, right? He's making some interpretive choices for his audience, for his concerns, and he wants to do something with disciples and apostles. And so that's what he's doing.
I'm glad. It's the first time I've ever had any understanding.
And yeah, I'm happy to help as I can. I just don't have a whole lot of,
Words are used.
yeah. I'm still going to be clumsy with them. You're going to hear me talk about the 12 disciples. I promise. That's what I'm going to do. Yeah. That's right. Good. All right. Well, have a great week, everybody. We'll see you.